this is going to, I'll give you a little bit of a sense of what we are trying to do here, which is the motivation of this work and some preliminary results. And Claudia told me I have an hour, which, you know, make for sure I'll be happy then to chat afterwards, because I think there's a lot also that I also want to learn about your reaction, because at this point, since we are presenting this data for the first time, we want to know and understand what we can do with this data a little bit. So it's a two-way thing I'm really looking forward to. This is a bit different from what I've done before, and it's mostly a group of sociologists and demographers. You can recognize many of the names in here, some of them like my colleague or Anne and Letizia and some students at Bocconi. And then this started as part of ISSP group on low fertility, and you can really guess from that. And then we started also thinking about other countries beyond. Okay, and so what is that we're trying to do? And as I said, this is going to be, it's not in more economies, it's more a demography type of work. You'll see, it's a strange animal, and you'll see what's the reaction that you have. So we have this idea that people have different understandings and expectations of what a family is. Okay? And with those are really goals or things that compound what a family is. It can be related to union status, to fertility, to what is the childbearing behaviors they have, to the investments on children. Is a whole package. And those give rise to their own individual potential family ideal. Each person may have on one end what an ideal of a successful family is in a society. And here, for those who do fertility, may start thinking what parallel is that here when we think about ideal fertility, desired fertility, what I want fertility. We are a little bit in the same business here, a bit complicated. So we are going to talk about maybe people who consider something an ideal or successful family in a society, and also what will be potentially the one that they may want. And both may differ. And you're going to see in the results that people sometimes say things that are not exactly the same for what they desire and for what they think is an ideal in a society. Of course, socioeconomic conditions and cultural legacies may impact what people think is an ideal society, a successful society, a successful family. And then they also, in addition, be affected by socioeconomic status across countries. So we have heterogeneity at the socioeconomic status in countries. Most of the research that we know and that we all do normally focuses on one variable. So people work on fertility, on partnership, on divorce, on investment on children. Here we wanted to try to recognize the fact that family is a multidimensional concept. Okay, so many things are together when we think about the family. We may have a picture, and that involves many of the things that we all study in parts: partnership, children, family dynamics, relationships. So what we're going to do here is we're going to use a factorial survey experiment, or what some people call a conjoint experiment, to study this multidimensionality, the fact that people think about the family as a holistic thing, a multidimensional thing, in different countries. And you're going to see already that these countries in part come from this group that we had at USSP. So we have the low fertility Southern European, Italy, and Spain. And we have also Korea, Singapore, Japan, China as part of the low East Asian fertility. And then, you know, I really wanted to get the data from the US. So I pushed to get the US, and Arnie wanted to know about Norway. And also we thought, not only that, we thought that this was interesting because it's going to bring very different welfare states, institutional settings that was going to give us a little bit of a sense of heterogeneity on that concept. So we wanted to put all the countries there. And in a moment, I'll talk about this conjoint and what this means. So people are going to be offered different pictures or vignettes of what a family is, and those are randomly generated. Okay, so that's the beauty of the conjoint, and I'll talk in a moment about that. And then with that, we're going to be estimating what people like across these different multidimensional vector of what a family can be. And we can get the relative importance of the different parts of what people think is part of the package of what an ideal family is. Okay? So just to give you a little bit preliminary findings, and I normally do that if I have to present in front of economists, you better do that in the first slide, and then you make sure at least you have the idea. What we're going to find interestingly is that in these very different countries ex ante, this idea that we're going to maybe find different things and the cross-cultural differences or legacies were going to be so important, we find actually many universal values and many universal senses of what an ideal family is. So in general, we find that divorce is very penalized in these vignettes that we're going to find. That having a child at least is very important, but you'll see that the number doesn't matter. And I have spent a lot of my career thinking about 1, 2, no? It's not as much the number, that's just having. At least that's what it comes in relative terms to other things that you're going to see. And then the education of children is very important. So people think educating and putting resources in children is important. And still we're going to have some differences across contexts. So it's not that everything is going to disappear, but mostly it's going to be in the intensity of how this goes, not in the direction of this. So the direction is going to be relatively similar. It's more how important some of these things are as opposed to others. Okay? So that's just a little bit to know what you're going to get. And I think I should stop and disappear from the scale of this. Okay. Okay, so let me give you a sense of that about what I'm going to do. I'm going to first start with which was our question, and there are many motivations to start that. I give you a sense of what we had in mind, but this was the result of many regular meetings on Zoom as a group for over 2 years, a year and a half, which was very nice. In the times of pandemic, it was a good time to find good friends and just discuss these topics. I'll show you the method of why we chose to do conjoint and what does it mean and the advantages it has. I'll describe the survey and then I'll start showing you preliminary results, and depending on the time, I'll show you more or less. And then I'm happy to talk about more later. And then a bit what we want to do with this data. Okay, so that's a bit what I'm going to do. Okay, so why we started talking about that? I already gave you a little bit this idea we had in mind. Okay. So this came from talking about different experiences in different contexts, mostly low fertility context, and thinking that there's something out there that people may aspire, or people may have expectations that it's what they want to get or what they think people expect them to get, which may not be the same. So those expectations, in many cases, are often theorized as that the macro trend result from changing institutional and societal context. So we know that labor market institutions may affect that, social norms may affect that, and they aggregate that with the macro trends, but also preferences may be something important. Okay? So preferences are going to be related to this family, are going to be multidimensional. And so it's not something about one particular thing, it's just a package. And that's something that we were emphasizing when we were thinking about family as a whole. And then, as I said, it's going to be related to formation, labor distribution, family dynamics, so on and so forth. So the question is, well, all these things are important, but how do people come together into putting something that is a coherent family idea or a picture of what it is a family idea? And then, of course, the important thing will be later behavior. So that will be some preferences, the second part will be behavior. And that's not something I'm going to show you now, but we have data in the survey, as I will explain, that we can really see the matching of what people think and what people do. Okay? And behavior will be, well, if they think that having children is important, are they really going to go for it? I was talking to Eva over lunch. Are they going to resort to all the things that they can just achieve that? Or if they think equality is important, are they going to try to put the means for both in a couple to work, so on and so forth? So that's going to be a little bit the behavior. So most of the research focuses on a single attribute. We are interested in the whole picture. And so that's a little bit what we're going to get, like a package of the whole picture. So why a family idea may be important for the things that we all study? Well, the family idea, as I said, may be relevant on the behavior that people do. And also that behavior, of course, may be mediated by the institutions, the restrictions, the barriers, the possibilities people face. So just to give you some examples. So if people think about a family as a unit that is, the key thing is production of kids, okay? So we think family is producing some kids which are successful or materially advancing, then the whole focus of behavior should be more about, which is the parental financial strategies they are going to do in terms of saving, investment on children, in terms of the labor force effort that they're going to put into achieving that material well-being. Or even the extended family, the fact that grandparents may move close to the children or may provide child care, so on and so forth, or even put some resources together, maybe part of that package. If in fact, what people think about the family idea is something a little bit different, it's more a sense of companionship, it's more a unit of emotional support. then maybe things are a little bit different, okay? And in here I put something which is a little bit out of the box, if you may, but that was just to show you the debates we were having in the Zoom room. Well, there's all this thing, if you prioritize happiness and you live in a society that thinks and focuses a lot on hyper-achieving children or hyper-educational competition, maybe some people may shy away or may decide to really somehow protect children into doing some behavior for the sake of the emotional stability. So you see movements, for example, and we had vision from UPenn telling us about South Korea moved to rural areas. This is a few people, it's not that everybody in Korea is moving to rural areas, but just to say some people may do behaviors to respond to that idea. I'm sorry. And the last thing important is image and status. So some people may think an ideal family is a family that, it just looks good. It's more of a window, a window dressing or something more into when you go in a shop. So if that's what's important, if an ideal family is a family that you can just go with your face high in the street and say, well, look at that, my family is ideal. Well, what do people may care? Or maybe people may care more about the house they have, or the neighborhood they live, or the type of consumption pattern, the car they do, what the school kids go. Some of these things may be more important. Okay. So thinking about that and then trying to link this to the fact that we were observing very differential macro aggregates across the countries that we had in mind, we were thinking, well, maybe these family ideas are going to aggregate up in differential behaviors that then we observe into these different trends that we have. Okay. So a better understanding of the family ideas may allow us to think about the mechanisms governing the micro level intimate family context that by themselves in a particular context, given that institutions or barriers, may aggregate up in something that we observe as a macro aggregate, which is normally what we are looking at. Okay? So if investing more in fewer children is what matters, then of course on aggregate, those micro behaviors will end up turning into a downward trend in fertility rates. So if the quantity quality trade-off is so important that given those constraints, maybe people go more for the quality, then you should observe a decrease in quantity. If people thinking about those achievements of material well-being are faced with, for example, social norms or very inegalitarian institutions, maybe the result, of course, the result can be opposition and just standing up, or maybe an equilibrium that people are going to say, well, in those situations, we're going to see justify the division of the labor within the families just for the advancement of children that may explain relatively low levels of women participation, especially after children are born. So if you see, for example, in East Asia, some women, then once the children are there, decreasing effort or putting a lot of more resources or time on just producing this hyper-educated child. Okay, so this may be because of the type of very gender inegalitarian labor force that they face. Or the idea of protecting children may also lead to closeness, may change patterns of residents moving close to the grandparents, grandparents moving to the children, or extended family behavior in some sense. If we go to other types of countries that we are hoping to eventually do, which are maybe less developed countries in which co-residence or extended family is a behavior to just do that. So that would be the idea. So that's the motivation. Okay. So what do we do with that, and how do we think about those pathways? Well, of course, there's too many arrows. And here I'm putting some arrows, and we can just think about feedback effects at some point. So the idea would be, well, people may have these preferences of what a family ideal is, and then we observe some behavior, and that behavior, of course, is something that responds to the constraints people have, and maybe some of it may actually realize family ideals, some of it may be not necessarily realize family ideals. So it's not that everything we observe is what people want to or achieve to. And then that leads to demographic patterns and feeds back into preferences. So what we wanted to do just to start with is we just wanted to take this package, that's the first thing I'm just going to show you, and say, well, we're going to go to these families and to these countries, and we're going to see whether this first part, this family ideal, is very different or not. Well, we know we observe very different macro trends in some things and not in others. So the first thing we had to ask ourselves is, well, now we want to talk about families. What is a family? And that was very complicated. Okay? And just to even, as you're going to see, even just trying to draw this vignette, we have to make choices. You have to narrow down. You have to narrow down how many things you explain a family is. And in many cases, you have to narrow down the potential scenarios, because of course, families are infinite combinations of families. It's complicated to talk about just one single family, but we came to with very, very basic things. He says, well, in general, we think it's some people living together. That's not a family. They can be cohabiting, married, or also another important thing people have in general is they have children or not, and maybe they don't live together anymore, but they still have children. So maybe they are divorced, but they were a unit, and they are still a unit through the fact that there are some children they produce that is existing as a part of that unit. Okay? So that was the starting point. Of course, what happens with that? Well, of course, here I'm not taking into account, for example, single parent households, and I'm not going to account for that, and I'll tell you why. Essentially, it's a matter of the way the experiment is set up. It's going to depend very different types of unions. Here we're going to talk about cohabiting and married. That's what we're going to focus. But we decided to start by something. So what are going to be the things we are going to put in this package? So the family idea that we are going to show to these people, that those scenarios are going to have these parts. So one end, we're going to start with these basic factors. So we are going to show them whether these people are in different union status. So they can be married, they're going to be cohabiting, or they are going to be divorced. Okay? And we are not going to specify, in general, the vignettes are going to be heterogeneous couples. Of course, that's another thing. We are not touching it here, and in general, they're going to be couples, not single. Then there's going to be a number of children from 0 to 3. And then there are going to be some socioeconomic factors, the income level, whether these people overall in the society are at the average, above or below average, just to have a sense of the resources and whether people care about that or they don't care. Actually, people care a little bit on that. And then something which was interesting, and that goes more to the status. And that was a big cultural discussion we had. So when we're talking, our colleagues, especially in East Asia, we're talking a lot about family status and respect. The idea that a family is respected. And for us, who are coming from other traditions, the idea of what is family respect was a very complicated thing. So then we had this debate on what do we mean by that? And each person somehow had a different sense of a family being respected to us. But still we thought, okay, let's put that in there and let's see how people react in different places where we are going to ask. Then we have talked about more dynamics in the family, is if it's companionship, if it's really emotional support, this is something that is going to matter in this package. And then more extended families, so something like grandparents, and finally investment in children. We're thinking about the quality and about this idea of the hyper education. Okay? So what we did is we went and used conjoints, and I want to know how many people are familiar with conjoints. Okay. I thought I suspected, but I fear. Okay. So this is something that you will start seeing more. Okay. So what is a conjoint? A conjoint is a tool that was started basically by people in marketing. Okay. So what they were doing is a statistical tool. I'll show you a little bit what it does. And imagine that you're trying to sell cars. And what you want to know is how much money you're going to make out of cars. So what you want to do is you want to get the car that is going to sell the most. So you want to know the color, the types of lights, whether you have heated seats, if it's leather or not, wheel or whatever. So what you're going to do is you're going to have these groups of people that you're going to be asking and showing them different types of cars. And you're going to change from dark blue to pale blue to red. And each car has many things. So each car is going to have the color, the wheels. And so you're going to randomly generate cars. Okay? And with this randomization of the cars, you're going to show to people of different demographics. And with that, you're going to have an estimate at the end of this population of how much people care about each dimension of the car. Do people care a lot about the color? Or actually, they don't really care about the color. And if they care about the color, what is the color that is preferred? Or they care a lot about the heated seats or not. So with that, indirectly, somehow you know how much you're going to sell if you're putting lots of blue cars. and also whether you can charge a lot for a heated seat or not, because this is something people value a lot or not. So essentially, that's why people were using this tool. Okay, but this is a tool that nowadays slowly has become to be used actually by more and more social scientists. It has started a bit in economics, is widely used in political science, interestingly, and starting a bit in sociology now. So you are going to start seeing it a little bit more. Okay? And so, for example, people who do migration may be familiar with the name Time Miller. I don't know if there's anybody in the room, but he has already done these things, generating which will be the type of migrant you would like to get. Okay, are you willing to accept somebody who's Muslim or not? Are you willing to somebody who's a refugee as opposed to an economic migrant? It has lots of papers on that. Okay? So what you do, the idea is essentially the randomization. That's the key thing that allows you to get those estimates. So essentially what you're going to do is you're going to generate randomly the features of whatever you want the people to evaluate. Okay? And it's going to be random. Each time that you're generating that picture or that family that I'm going to show you. And the nice thing is also going to be random and independent of who is receiving it. So that's going to be completely orthogonal, whether I'm a man or a woman, the age I have, the education I have. So in that sense, it's going to make inference very nice, because I'm not going to have things which are going to be correlated with the characteristics of the person. They're just going to be purely random, as I'm going to show. Okay? So the advantage is going to be I can put many dimensions in a package, and then I can see the relative coefficient, the relative intensity, which people like one thing over the other, or care more about one thing over the other. As I said, it's going to be randomized across the different experimental conditions. So everything is going to be produced completely random. And you'll see more in a moment when I show you an example. Okay? And then things should be completely multicollinear. And here I'll give you an example to show what it means when you don't have multicollinearity, because we had a problem, and you'll see by example what I mean by that. The nice thing is that I can run that in very large samples. So normally, otherwise, for lab experiments, you have a bunch of people and generate what people care about some things. In this case, we're going to have around 2,000. Well, we have 2,000 per person per country, and in the US, we have 3,500 people. And each person is going to see 6 vignettes. So we have a large sample of choices that people are going to make, and are going to tell us, this is a nice family, this is not a nice family. Okay? And then a very big advantage is that somehow it reduces social desirability. And what do I mean by that? So if I tell you, divorce, children, and everything, and I tell me, is that important? And people may just be, the things that are supposed to be nice, you just put them nice and more biased by what you expect people are thinking is socially desirable. But you're not forced to tell me how much more important is this as opposed to the other thing. But if I'm asking you in a scenarios that look more or less the same, except one thing is bearing over the other, I'm going to ask you to rate this thing over compared to other things. And in that sense, indirectly, you're telling me the relative difference that you pose to different things, which is indirectly is producing this social desirability that otherwise I would get everything is super nice, and then I have no clue to do anything. Yes.
Just a quick question from understanding. Do you present the people with a photo of the family?
Now, you'll see, I'm going to show you. In a moment, I'll show you exactly what people are going to see.
Because I was wondering if they also might react subconsciously.
No faces, nothing. But that's another thing you can do. People do this also. Okay, so in our case, it's just words that we're going to use. Yes, I said.
Is this related to the revealed reference concept in economics?
It could be in this sense, because you're essentially getting it in this way. And it's nice because, in consumption patterns, you can get it indirectly through prices. Okay, and that will be your revealed reference. But in other things, if you don't have prices, how do you get it? And that would be an indirect way of getting prices. Yes. So I'm actually doing another paper, which is completely different, on choosing societies with political scientists. And because we have income preferences, we can actually price the other things. And I'm getting exactly the point you're making. Yes. Yes.
Alicia, I'm just curious about the trade-offs between dimensions. How can you measure trade-offs in the type of analysis you are doing? Imagine, for instance, that some people would tell you, well, our ideal is to have 2 kids only in case I have an ideal partner who is very supporting.
But that's making life complicated. The problem is that life is like you say,
Yeah.
I cannot really do this in here. The only thing I'm doing is, a very stylized trend idea. And of course, then once we realize what interactive matters, then we all go and dig into that particular
Right.
field. But I cannot get what you're doing here.
Yeah, okay.
Yes,
Thanks.
yes. But if I had interactions and I can do that, then I can see if some things are complementary or not. And that would be another way. Just to tell you, so far what we've done, we don't get much from in the interactions, which would be pointing. So if I have somebody who's nice in communication, yes, I'm willing to have children. Otherwise, not. Not much.
If I get a big house, I'm willing to have 3 kids.
Yes, but we don't. Well, from this, first, there's limitations, precisely from what I said, and second, so far from the interactions we've done, it's not a lot that we've got, which will be going more into your line. Yes.
Does this have anything to do with what used to be called Lancaster utility analysis in economics? Lancaster utility analysis was an alternative set of utility theory. And it was about pricing attributes.
Yeah, I guess, from the consumption theory, you think?
Yes.
Yeah, I think that would be, and it's going a little bit more from what Alicia is saying. Yes, in consumption, I think that would be one way to think about that. And it's the same when you're thinking about the marketers.
In an automobile, speed would be more.
Yes, yeah, it's close to that.
Price speed.
Yes, it's close to that, exactly. That's the idea. Okay, so orthogonality. So I'll give you an example. Yes, Miguel.
I'm just playing a little bit more the concept of the lack of multicollinearity.
Look at that. I'm going to show you an example now. Okay, so which is not the end of the world, but I'll show you there are some solutions, and we went for the cleanest and easiest, but there are some solutions. So what will be a problem here? Okay, we had a problem. So imagine that what I'm thinking about is I want to evaluate, union, so cohabitation, marriage, and divorce. Okay, and I'm showing to someone that, and then at the same time I'm showing 0 children, 1, 2, 3, and suddenly this guy's fine. Somebody who's divorced and has 0 children, and this person is going to think, okay, how do I think about a family here? That will be a first problem. Okay, is that a family? And if these people are divorced, everybody lives in a different place, and there are no children in the middle. But that will make more complicated if suddenly then I have other 2 dimensions that tell me, and this family is interested in saving a lot for children. But once I randomize that, I will have a family who's divorced, has no children, and is interested in saving a lot for the children. So in that sense, investing in children is dependent on having children. So the dimension that I have that is related to the fact that you're children, that will be a problem of being not independent of each other, if you may, in that sense. So I cannot produce a random family that is nonsense. So how do I do that? That will be a problem. And the problem with divorce and no children, that is not necessarily nonsense. You can say, well, that was a failed family or not failed. This is something that doesn't produce children. But the other people will say, well, if we think about families of somebody who lives together, or if they don't live together, have produced something together, am I making something very complicated in their minds? But I think the more clear one is, if I'm telling them something about aspirations of education for children, or whether people are saving for children and there are no children in the picture, that doesn't make sense. Doesn't make sense. This is an example of what will be. So what do we do with that? Some people would say, well, we're going to impose a barrier and avoid any random combination that produces 0 children with investments or savings for children. Okay, that is possible, and people do that. And then there are some estimates, some statistical tools to do some types of weighted estimations to solve that. We debated; they didn't seem to be clean, and we decided to go for the drastic, simple route. It's not saying it's not possible to do something. We didn't want to get into the complications. So what we did is we split the sum. Okay, so we did the following. To avoid that exact interdependence, we created 2 types of profiles. Some profiles were telling us something about what people wanted to do with their children, and a few of them, half of the sample, or a bit less than half of the sample, but were didn't have any information about what they wanted to do with the children. So in that sense, we never really had the problem of having a family with a 0 random generated kid and then choices the parents were doing with the children. I'm going to show you in a moment. So this is going to be easier. This is what it looks like. Okay? So I'm going to have universe A and I'm going to have universe B. And universe A is going to only have what we're going to call 8 attributes or dimensions. So what is an attribute for dimension? An attribute of dimension are these lines. Okay? So these are all the things that I randomize over. So people, when they see a family, in the case of universe A, they are going to see 8 attributes of a family. Okay? And when they're going to see people, they're going to get a family from universe B, they're going to have 10 lines, okay? So 10 explanations of what this family is doing. Why? Because the universe B is going to include some dimensions, and you're going to see an example in a moment, that are going to be related to types of choices people do with regard to their children, the education their children they aspire to, and whether they are actually saving for their children's future. That avoids the problem of having 0 children and having that. So that means that the second thing, so one thing is the attributes or dimensions, which are this level, by this thing. And then another thing is what we call levels, okay? These are the technical things that people in conjoint do. So level is within each attribute, how many things you are randomly off. So for union, in the case of universe A, I'm only going to have 2 levels, marital cohabiting. I'm not going to put divorce because I don't want to get into a divorce with 0 children. And in the universe 3, I'm going to have marital cohabiting or divorce. In the B, here children are, in the A, sorry, are going to be 1, 2, 3, or 0, because I'm going to allow 0 when I'm not letting the divorce or the financial expenditures for the children in there. Or in the case of the B, it's only going to be 3. It's going to be randomized over 1, 2, 3. Okay? So when I'm going to talk about A, is just restricted up in here. When I talk about B, partial results, is the whole thing. Does this respond to your question, Miguel, on the independence? Yeah.
I mean, I see that this is related to the orthogonality.
Yes, yes, that it is. That's what.
My question was about the multicollinearity.
Oh, of these things coming together.
Yeah, so when
Yeah.
I started thinking about colors, and then my mind goes.
Yes, yes. Yeah, well, but in this case, the colors will be the levels. Within a color, you will have different levels. And then in the options, different will tell you how much more they care for the dark blue or the pale blue in relation to each other. You will be estimating each one separately. And I think makes sense. And then going to multicolor animal, thinking things come together, we'll go more into what Thomas was asking. Maybe there are things that are packaged together, and in these things, the interaction should play or not. That would be another way of thinking about that. I don't know which of the two you're thinking about. We'll get to that. Okay, so how is the structure of the survey? The survey has many more things than what we're going to show you. I'm going to show you today. We start by the consent, questions about the self, some demographics. Then the vignette, which is what I just described. People are going to be shown 6, okay? And then we have many nice things that we can then use afterwards. So some things about their own preferences express about, what things you value for children or what things you think are important for families. So in this case, they have to do the traditional evaluation question, so we can go back and see if they match. Then we actually know about the children they have, the time they spend with children outside, inside of the household, their work, the grandparents, the contact with the grandparents, the education of the parents. We have everything, but we still haven't started to use that. That's part of what we can do with them, what people think, okay? But this is a lot that we have in there. And one thing we are doing is when people are shown the families, they are randomized the attributes for each participant. So when you generate, a person is going to see 6, and all these things I was showing to you, they're going to see it in the same order, but each person is going to see a different order. So just not to have that it's always the same. Vignettes are not going to always start by number of children or by education. They can start with anything, just not to have the fact that it's always one thing that you're showing at the beginning. And then they have to stay 15 seconds per page. You can force them to read it. They kind of click and move forward. And actually, we have a timer, so we know how long they stay in there. So it's a nice thing that we can really measure quality of the response somehow by having that. Okay. Okay, so this is how it looks like. This is one example. It's very teeny tiny. And I just generated randomly before doing the presentation. First, each thing is translated in the original language of the country. So I did myself the Spanish one. I checked the US. Jim with the students did the Japan one, and Arnie was taking a look at the Norwegian. So we all put there just to make sure that the sentence makes sense in the language, which was an important thing. And then the names of the people were randomly allocated around 10 relatively common and neutral names in each country. So we tried to. It's complicated in countries that are very multicultural, but we try to do something relatively homogeneous. Of course, in some cases, like in the US, you could say, well, I could choose some names that are very much racially charged or not. I try to do neutral. It's very complicated. But that's what we is Elma. And these people are around 45 years old. This is we keep it constant. We figure, okay, it's more or less like, let's think this is a family that it's complete in the sense of fertility, more or less, okay? Unless they go to the extreme that Eva will tell that they can go up to 50, but not much longer. So, and this is an example. So each parent and the children discuss their daily life frequently and feel comfortable expressing feelings and raising disagreements with each other. So that tells me about communication dynamics in the household. This good communication. So Liz and Robert are divorced. They are cohabiting, or they're married. Highest level of education Liz and Robert children are expected to complete is a postgraduate degree. A bachelor's degree, high school. Okay? So what's the aspiration of those parents? At least the kids have to achieve. Lisa and Robert talk with the respective parents frequently and children with grandparents. So communication with the parents, with the grandparents, with the extended family. Lisa and Robert are saving money to support children transition to adulthood. So that's the one that is linked to children's adulthood saving. Lisa and Robert have 2 children, 0, 1, 2, 3. The family is well respected in their community. That's what we said, or it's not well respected. Both Lisa and Robert work full-time, and Lisa takes care of most of the family and household responsibilities. Okay, here we have 3 options. You see that Robert works full-time, and Lisa is basically at home. Either this one, which is the intermediate, Lisa does everything, essentially, or we have the third one, which is Lisa and Robert do the 2 things, okay? Which is mostly the egalitarian type of relationship. So we have this different intra-household allocation of time and work. Lisa and Robert combined income is higher than the average, country average, is at the average or is below. Lisa doesn't feel conflicted between her family responsibilities and her career. So she's a this, she's doing the 2, but she's a this. And Robert feels conflicted between his career and the possibility to help out with family responsibilities because he's not doing anything in this case. Okay, so basically, here we have the combination. We have none feels conflicted, whatever role they have. Both feel conflicted, either she feels conflicted or either he feels conflicted, okay? And that goes more on the work-family balance, okay? So that's the picture, and you will say, oh, it's a lot. Yes, it's a lot, but that's precisely the goal of it. I mean, just we wanted to say for once, let's put together and let's see how important these things are in our life. Just try to be a little bit false if you want about something like this. And you're gonna see, okay? Because if I went around, it would be curious to know what you think is gonna be there, okay. And then the interesting thing, and that's actually good, we have 3 dependent variables. So all these things are gonna come out with a rating. So people are gonna have to rate 0 to 10 this family, and they're gonna see 6 of them. And for each family, they have to do 3 ratings, okay? So the 3 rating is, this describes a successful family. Second, this describes a family that people in my parents' generation would consider successful. So I'm trying to see how much family dynamic change has been through generations or not, or how people think about their families. We can discuss in Q&A because that can be something to discuss. And this describes a family that I would like, okay? So when I'm going to talk about design, this is a family I would like, which again, what people could consider successful is something I would like or not. Doesn't necessarily have to match. It's maybe another thing. I not always match. Okay. So with that, well, I won't talk about that. You know, you're a demographer, so you know about the countries' differences that I have in there. So what did we do? We went and used online panels. So these very large panels that now people in social sciences are starting to use. And then you can filter. You go there and you ask, well, just filter by age, by gender, by education, this people. So in here we sample female, male, and then we sample 2 age groups. And we only have people 25 to 50. That's the range that we have. And then in the US, we requested another sampling by race because I was actually interested to see if I could see something different. Actually, even to try to see the Asian compared to the East Asian, there were some continuities, which interesting that they are so. And in Singapore, because also it's a country that with very clear ethnic groups, they also did sampling of India or sampling of India and Indonesia. And it's a bit the same. Okay. We estimate things in different ways, and it doesn't quite matter the results. So we need multi-level random intercepts with vignettes nested in individuals and nested in countries. That's one thing we did. Or if you do OLS with fixed effects for individuals and countries and clustered as individual, basically results are essentially the same. Okay? And then we also show that robustness, some things are interesting. And nothing is interesting, I mean, doesn't matter. The key thing is going to be well, that everything is randomized. So everything randomized means that if I use any of the characteristics of the person, if I say, for example, the basic correlation between variables and vignettes is 0. Okay? 0 because by construction is 0. Whether you are female or male doesn't matter. You receive with the same probability a divorced family or a married family. And if I use the characteristics of the vignettes that you receive to predict your gender, to predict your income, to predict your education, to predict anything, basically it's not predicted because it's completely randomized. Okay? Okay, results. Okay. So this is universe A. And now, what I have a pointer, no? Yeah. So disregard this is an error with it. Okay. This is Italian. So we miscoded one small thing in the Italians. Unfortunately, what we did is that in the universe A, where we only had to have cohabiting and marriage, we had a few divorces miscoded with the cohabiting. So the Italians in universe A came with some divorce. The nice thing is that if I show you, and I'll go back here. If I show you with and without Italy, okay, so even if I kill that problem we had with the fact that we put those divorced people in the Italians, everything else is the same. So let's focus on what we get. So how do I read that? This is purely coefficients, okay, of those estimates. The dependent variable is 0 to 10, and it's a 3 variables. 0 to 10, what's the successful family? 0 to 10, my family's generation. 0 to 10, the family I would like. Okay. And then what things are interesting here to show? Well, an interesting thing to show is, for example, not surprisingly, cohabitation. The red one is the family, the parents. So when you compare to marriage, which would be in this case the baseline, compared to marriage, they penalize more. They think the parents' generation would have thought that somebody who was cohabited would be less successful family, less prepared family than somebody who was not cohabited, somebody who was married. And desire or successful is the same, and it's always prefer marriage over cohabitation. Another thing is income. If you look at income, the average is in here. So people prefer to, or think it's more successful to have a family with high income than low income. The parent generation a little bit more, but not much. Childbearing. This is the parent generation. So no children for the parent generations is much more penalized. It's much more, it's considered to be much less of a successful family if somebody doesn't have any children than what it is for the current generation. Okay? And then when we think about 3 children, 2 children as opposed to one is the baseline. For current generations, there's essentially no difference about the number of children that may be successful, a little bit more too, but not so much. For the parental generation, 2 or 3 is better, is considered better than 1. Okay. But the big thing is that it's more a 0 versus some here in terms of the relative coefficient that you get at the intensity. The game for current generation, if we think about successful family today or desire, is mostly none or some, or 1, at least 1. And then communication. So this is whether people communicate with each other in the family and the children chat with their parents openly. Not so important for the parental generation, way more important in current generation. So that's one big thing, and you're going to see all over it. Communication has become a more important thing value when you think about family. Which to some extent, you know, if you think about changes, for example, in education of women, female labor force participation, more independence, the fact that the unit before may have been more of a, you know, pulling together resources and more a place for protection, in fact, even economically for women or a place of production, nowadays it's more of a choice of companionship in relative terms to what it used to be before. So the fact that this communicates well or not is considered to be much more important now than what it was before. That's the way I would think that. And then if they are work and balance family, neither conflicted is the most important, as opposed to both are conflicted with the choices. And then for the labor force is really egalitarian now. Parental is here, but today is more both work and both take care of the house. Okay, so this is what is showing up in here. So that's a little bit the basic things that one shows. Okay. What about if I put now the university? The university has all these things, and I'm going to now have 2 variables that are going to be the ones on investment in children. Okay? So now this is properly estimated, okay, because this is everybody's answering before. So the first thing again is divorce is dominating here. Okay? When people see a family that is divorced, is the one that they are going to penalize more when they are rating it as a successful family or as a desired family. Is way more penalized if you think about parental generation and then current generation, so which is telling you about social norms change, in the desire is in between. So these two are different. This one falls in between, but it's a little bit the same thing for cohabitation. Okay, so is married, which will be the reference, divorce, and cohabiting. But that's way that strikes, because if I have to kill that and zoom down, that will be, you will see much more action into this one. Okay. The other things will stay the same. So the income is lower income in here, high income, more or less the same. Now I don't have 0 children, because in this place I have variables about the investment in children. So when I look about the reference of 1 child to 3, you can really see that if anything now people desire 3 children are not something people want in this group as opposed to 1. But in the previous generation, these people argue, and we get to that in the previous generations, people prefer 3 and 2 over 1. And here is more indifference between 1 and 2, and not necessarily as good to have 3 in that particular group. Communication, again, the same, and these notices are different people. So I will run these things on 2 groups. Some people saw universe A, some people saw universe B. And as of these things, the new things are these. So which are the aspirations? This will be, the average will be you aspire that your kid has a bachelor degree. It's not quite different for postgraduate. It's a little bit better nowadays for this generation. To have a kid who has postgraduate education is significantly different, it's higher, but the difference is between compulsory education and bachelor. So people essentially aspire for children to have, or think, let's put this one, is desire and successful or ideal family would be people, children who have tertiary education or postgraduate education, as opposed to just high school education. Here, and then people actually value that families are saving. Okay. So this is the stylings.
Should we end the tutorial?
Yeah, there are 5 minutes left.
Oh my goodness. And it's really over, no? Okay.
I mean, that's it.
Okay.
Like we said, if it takes a little bit longer, that's okay.
Let me show you. This is everybody. I want to show you this. This is all the countries one by one. Okay, let me. And we can. This is everybody. What do I want to show you here? What? Forget about this because this is a problem. Okay. One interesting thing: income, and that's something that I find is very striking. So why does income matter more? Income matters more when income is lower and inequality is high. So if you look at this data, here is the numbers. The two lines here are Norway. This is telling me that people in Norway, when they see income, they actually don't think an ideal family is higher or lower, or rated higher or lower, with more or less income. And in fact, this could be because the range of income is much narrower than in other places, and the fact that the welfare state is such that the consequences of high or low income are not the same depending on where you live. So if you have to invest in children's education, or if you have some health insurance or some universal benefits, they're going to be there in place no matter where you are in that, or you're going to be compensated. What is the worst is China. So the places where the income distribution is much wider and people who are actually poor, that's where income people really penalize and think a family that is below income is actually something I don't think it's something successful, or it's not something I desire. Okay? That's an important thing. The important thing also is when you think about egalitarian, the Spanish, and this is showing everywhere, Spaniards are the ones who want more egalitarian. This is a big change. I think this is interesting when you look at comparison generationally, big change from, cutting with the previous generation's story. And then in terms of no children, everything is packaging here. So everybody, more or less, even the Chinese, no children is bad, but look at that. The Chinese are the ones, and the Koreans, that are going to tell you that 3 children is too much. Okay, so the norm and the fertility is also thought about the ideal, and we know that the ones who do fertility, we know this is already ingrained in their preference. So we have this in here, whereas in the other ones are packaged. Yeah. There's not such a big difference, but in that is a clear difference. And then, okay, I'm trying to see if I can tell you in very little time. Okay, I'm happy to stay and show you more things. You mean I need to cut, no? I need to. Okay, so let me tell you what we're going to do.
Minutes, yeah.
Okay, let me tell you what we're going to do. I'm sorry. What we can do with this. Okay, so what do we want to do with this? So first one thing we have to do is we need to add weights. Okay, so at this point we haven't still added weights. We have done it with Singapore, but we're working on that. We want to see weighted for the census, all these things. And then in China, still we have a very urban sample. We're going to try to go more rural, get more people of lower income. We want to study also generational change, and that's something that this is possible because we have people of different ages who are talking about their parents, which are going to be different ages. And we actually see a mismatch between what they think is ideal for them and they think is ideal for their parents, and actually even a difference between the ones who are younger and the ones who are older. The nice thing is that the direction is similar everywhere. So you can really see that all these trends I'm showing you, they are all going in the same direction and the change generationally is the same. Another thing we want to look is, we want to see whether sometimes there's a mismatch between what people think is successful in a society and what actually they desire. And some things are more tempered, if you may, and even in some cases even closer to previous generation in what people are saying they desire. And that's something actually interesting to look at. And then we can use the rich additional questions into looking at, what their own behavior is, what their fertility is, what their union status is, their education is, which is actually very nice. And I do have already some labs on heterogeneity, and I'm happy to talk. Since I'm going to be here today and tomorrow all day, I'll show you and talk about these things for those who don't have to be online. But yeah, so I think I should then stop. I have tons of things to show you, but I guess that's.
Many thanks.